a large section of my presentation. The ocean represents more than 90% of the habitable space on the planet, hosts 25% of high-level species, and provide more than 10% of the proteins that humans are using. And finally, the oceans are also protecting coastlines. Several coastal ecosystems, coral reefs, but also mangroves, seagrass beds protect the coastline from the damaging action of waves and storms. There is a recent report by WWF which shows us the capital that is the ocean represents. So the numbers are quite small, but the important numbers are big. So you can see that, in fact, the capital is 24 trillion US dollars. It is much more than the sovereign funds of Abu Dhabi, Qatar, China, or Norway. And the yearly return to this capital is 2.5 trillion US dollars. It was mentioned this morning already. Again, a very large number, and it is very important to realize that this return from the capital is based on healthy oceans. I mean, if the oceans are not healthy, we won't get these $2.5 trillion every year. And in fact, if the ocean was a country, it will be the 7th country in the world. So it's a gigantic benefit for humanity. But the ocean is a victim of climate change as well as a major climate integrator. The ocean stores more than 90% of the heat, extra heat generated by increased greenhouse effect. The atmosphere only stores 1%. It is a small dot that probably you don't see on the screen. Obviously, that is a great service to society to store that heat because it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as much. But of course, it leads to global warming and also to warming of the ocean. The ocean also stores 28% of the CO2 we release into the atmosphere. Moderating climate change. If we didn't have an ocean, we would have more CO2 and an increased greenhouse effect. But this leads, as Rodrigo indicated, to ocean acidification. And finally, all the water that is resulting from the melting of ice caps and glaciers go into the ocean, generating sea level rise together with the warming, because warm water takes more space. So we have those, the blue color is obvious in this, on this slide, and it really shows how the ocean is important to climate-related issues. So what we have done with a group of colleagues as part of the Ocean 2015 initiative, we have looked at two emission scenarios that were designed by the IPCC. On the left-hand side, the low emission scenario, and on the right-hand side, the business as usual or high emission scenario. And we looked at the impact of those two scenarios to the chemistry and the physics, to the organisms and the ecosystem services. And you see that those two scenarios are vastly different. On the left-hand side, the low CO2 emissions would lead to 1.2 degree increase in temperature, 3.2 with the business as usual, minus 0.14 units with the low emission scenario for pH, minus 0.4 units for the high emission scenario, and then sea level rise 60 centimeters for low emission scenario and almost 90 for a high CO2 emission scenario. And this has also different impacts on organisms and services. If we look at the left-hand side, you see that we have looked at 7 key organisms, seagrasses, mangroves, corals, pteropods, which were mentioned by Rodrigo, bivalves, oysters and mussels, krill and finfish, and also ecosystem services such as ocean carbon uptake, coastal protection, coral reef recreation, bivalve fisheries and aquaculture, fin fisheries and also in high and low and mid latitude. And the colors indicate the impact. White mentions no risk of impact. Yellow, moderate impact. High is red, and very high is purple. And you see that on the left-hand side, with the low emission scenario, we are in the white to yellow for most of the things we looked at, except for bivalves and corals. With the high emission scenario on the right-hand side, we are almost everywhere in the red and purple, meaning the high to very high risks. It really shows that what is at stake at COP21 is the future of the ocean, both the chemistry, physics, the organisms, and the ecosystem services. There are solutions, but there are not very many, in fact, we have demonstrated in this policy brief, I have copies, printed copies available here. We have demonstrated that the ocean strongly influences the climate system and is an important provider for key services. The impacts are already detectable, coral reefs, bleaching, for example, and there is a high risk of impact even under the low emission scenario. So it is very important that we don't go above this scenario. And finally, there is a need for immediate and substantial reduction of CO2 emissions to prevent those massive and mostly irreversible impacts of CO2. And as CO2 increases, the protection, repair, and adaptation become fewer and less effective. Thank you very much.
Last panelist is Mr. Fang Jianmeng from the Chinese State Oceanic Administration.
女士们、先生们，上午好！非常荣幸能够随中国代表团参加本届我们的海洋大会。首先，我谨代表中国国家海洋局，向本次我们的海洋会议主办方助力外交部的热情接待和精心安排，表示衷心的感谢。 特别是昨晚精彩的音乐和民族歌舞，给我们留下了深刻的影响。其次，我还想对美国国务院及美驻华使馆的同事们，为我们胜利参会提供的支持和帮助表示感谢。下边，我就中国对海洋酸化和气候方面的实践。
in coping with the climate change and ocean acidification. The planet is our shared homeland, and to some extent, the ocean is our valued asset. To preserve and conserve the ocean is to protect our humankind. So, it is our common responsibility and objective to protect the ocean. Chinese government has long attached great importance to the ocean protection. To reduce CO2 emission, China has adopted active measures under the principle of common but differentiated responsibility to live up to our commitments as the major power in the world. China works hard to transform the economic development model by encouraging the green and low-carbon development. And years of efforts yield fruits that our 2013 per unit CO2 emission has been cut by 28.56% compared to 2005 level. And in June of this year, Chinese government submitted the China's voluntary commitment to scale up actions to meet the climate change to the Secretary of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, making the solemn statement that by 2020, our per unit GDP CO2 emission will decrease by 40% to 45% compared to 2005 level. and further down by 6 to 65% by 2030. 2 weeks ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping concluded the state visit to the United States. And he reiterated the commitment to implement our climate change policy, making headways in the sustainable development, as well as transforming the economic model to the green, low-carbon, and climate-adapted one. In terms of mechanism, production model, consumption model, economic policy, science and technological innovation, and international cooperation, Chinese proposal identifies a series of policies and measures to ensure the timely fulfillment of the objective. And action speaks louder than words. Chinese government has made concrete contributions in reducing CO2 emission. And will continue to honor our commitment to contributing more to the mitigation of climate change and ocean acidification. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chinese government and academic community have attached great importance to the monitoring and the study of ocean acidification. And for a long time, China has carried out observation and the research on marine environment, including the ocean acidification in our coastal waters and some part of the open seas. The State Oceanic Administration of China is the competent government authority in marine monitoring and marine scientific study, and scientific institutes affiliated to SOA plays the major part in China's ocean acidification monitoring and research. In 2008, SOA inaugurated the long-term observation campaign on the ocean-to-air CO2 flux. In 2013, priority is given to the key project of building China's offshore ocean acidification monitoring system, and this year sees the inclusion of the measures to handle the ocean acidification as part of the national 13th five-year plan on marine development, making the proper response to the ocean acidification on the top of our government agenda. And as far as I know, at present, scientists around the globe have made intensive observation, monitoring, and research on ocean acidification, yet the observations are still separated, limited, and fragmented. And in terms of the control mechanism and the future impact of the ocean acidification, more in-depth work are needed. So this kind of fragmented observation would be affected by such separated monitoring and studies. So more international cooperation and coordination should be rallied in this respect. In 2014's APEC 4th Ocean-Related Ministerial Conference, APEC members undertake to encourage collaborations within APEC on identifying, monitoring, addressing, and preparing for impacts of climate change, ocean acidification, and habitat change on ocean resources, including fishery and agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, all countries share the common responsibility in protecting the ocean. China is ready to work more closely with other countries to better cope with climate change and ocean acidification. So let us take this conference as the great opportunity to share relevant innovation and experience, as well as to discuss ways to facilitate international cooperation to meet the challenge. Thank you all.
What a great panel. I loved the idea of changing the name of our planet into Planet Water, because we are all about water. And I loved to hear that the ocean is the 7th economy of the world. It makes us think that we have to invest much more in the ocean than we have done up to now. Knowledge and understanding. Knowledgeable panelists sharing with us scientific information and the need to understand better this dynamic that is threatening us all, that is leading us maybe to extinction, but definitely we are killing ourselves, as we heard this morning. but also dedication and passion, and the need to continue researching on the unknowns. Just listening to Anne say that maybe there is a gene in the coral reefs that is resistant to acidification is something that we must really invest a lot more in. Adapted to acidification or not? The shared stewardship on the part of us all, and Dr. Fang ended his presentation by saying cooperation is a key word. We need to cooperate more, to monitor more, to dedicate efforts to invest on the oceans. The coastal communities have immediate impact on whatever we do or we don't. The ocean is a victim, and we must do something in Paris to reduce the emissions, much more than we are at the moment discussing about. We cannot fail in the Paris commitments. People are watching. Coastal communities in the ocean are needing our dedication, and we must work now. The ocean GDP is very big, and it's strong, and it's needed for us all. The SDG 14 needs to be addressed as something that is present in all our lives. Whenever we speak about food security and quality of life in the present and the future, let's think of the Sustainable Development Goal number 14. So thank you to all the panelists for your presentation. And now I will call on 3 announcements. One of them is Vladimir Ryabinin from the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. Where is Vladimir? Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. For giving me the mic. And also, thank you very much for referring to the Sustainable Development Goal number 14. So it has one of the targets, as you mentioned, to minimize and address the harmful impacts of ocean acidification. But at present, as was already mentioned, the ocean acidification is occurring at a rate which was unprecedented for nearly 50 million years. This means we find ourselves in a space which is poorly known. And wisdom has it, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. Therefore, it is incredibly important to mainstream and sustain marine biogeochemical and biological observations and continue pioneering research on ocean acidification. As United Nations specialized body on ocean science and observations, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, or IOC, with partners, Principality of Monaco, International Atomic Agency, Energy Agency, the Ocean Climate Platform, and many other members will strive to strengthen the global ocean acidification observing network, which will comprise an important part of the global observing system, global ocean observing system.
Thank you.
And this challenge also requires capacity development, both observations and research. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now call on Sébastien Treung from Conservation International.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. There are some important themes, I think, emerging from the session this morning. The threats the ocean are facing, the actions that we need to take to reverse decline, and also the fact that healthy oceans provide a range of benefits to people. Another important theme that's emerging is that we need to improve our monitoring and understanding of oceans. So how do we measure ocean health? How do we know that we're actually conserving the ability of the ocean to provide benefits to people? Well, 3 years ago, Conservation International and our partners launched the first Global Ocean Health Index. And today, in honor of our Ocean Conference, we are releasing the 2015 results from the Ocean Health Index. This measure is a measure of the 10 major benefits that the oceans provide to people. And we are providing scores for all those 10 benefits, from carbon storage and food provision to the ability of oceans to sustain coastal economies and livelihoods. We're providing those scores for 221 countries around the world that have oceans and coasts. And the global average score is only 70. So we have a lot of work to do to get to a fully sustainable ocean that scores 100 points. As an organization, we commit to working with any country to apply this index at the national or subnational level. And I'm particularly pleased to be making this announcement here in Chile in South America, because a lot of the leadership has come from this part of the world. Colombia was the first country to adopt the Ocean Health Index. Ecuador has applied a case study for the Bay of Guayaquil, and Peru is also looking into using the index. So if you're interested in applying it in your country, please speak to me and visit the website www.oceanhealthindex.org, and you can check out the score for your country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. That is a great announcement. Thank you. And to close this session, we will have Prince Albert that will make an announcement on the part of the Monaco Foundation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the panelists for a wonderful panel. It was in Monaco more than 6 years ago that a declaration was adopted, one of the first to alert public opinion and world leaders to this issue. It is also in Monaco that the International Atomic Energy Agency has set up its Ocean Acidification International Coordination Center. As you can see then, it is an issue to which I'm particularly committed. Because the facts are out there, the first signs of damages caused by acidification are already appearing, as we've seen, obliging us to act and to act quickly. It is clearly not easy. I will therefore simply discuss some of the areas which I think are absolutely essential. The first, of course, is the priority given to research, and this was talked about at length this morning. Given the length and indirect nature of the timescale involved, it is critical to have solid knowledge, the only basis on which action can be built. And yet, despite progress made in recent years, we still know very little about the reality that we are facing. Our first duty must therefore be to improve our knowledge by supporting research. It is equally important that we should not be afraid to invent and explore all possible technical solutions, and as complex and far off as they may seem today. These solutions may, in the future, allow us to limit acidification by capturing or removing some of the CO2 in the atmosphere. And above all, we must combat the main cause of acidification, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. This is a global challenge which will naturally be at the heart of COP21 in a few weeks. Another priority will be preventing the pollution of coastal waters, which we must not forget is also a major contribution to ocean acidification. This is a huge problem, especially in the Mediterranean, and solutions are currently being developed through regional management, in which I believe and which I am happy to support. It is also imperative to start thinking about the adaptation measures, which will sooner or later be essential when we see effects that acidification is now having on certain activities, such as oyster farming. And I believe it is clear that it will be difficult to completely reverse this trend by the end of the century. These activities are already being heavily impacted in some regions, as we've already seen. Scientific estimates anticipate an average reduction in the pH of the ocean surface, as we've seen, between 0.14 and 0.35 units by 2100. There is therefore an urgent need to start thinking now about how to adapt, while of course continuing in parallel to search for effective global solutions, and this is our collective responsibility. Finally, I think that raising public awareness on education and mainly educating leaders about an often ignored issue is an important challenge. Acidification represents a rare opportunity in that it offers a tangible illustration, including in economic terms. An illustration of greenhouse gas emissions, which is often perceived as an abstract or remote concept. It's finished. To this end, I'm delighted that the AMAO, the Monegasque Ocean Acidification Association, established in Monaco with the support of my foundation and chaired by Jean-Pierre Gattuso, who I salute here today, is able to serve as a useful vehicle for this process. To understand, to act, and to anticipate, these are the demands that ocean acidification make of us. I believe that they can also be extremely useful on a much broader scale. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. thank you for those announcements and commitments. I thank the government of Chile and that team that has made our life so easy in getting here and working here. So thank you to Chile and thank you to our panelists.